Well, our special correspondent, Karl Bostic, joins us from Tel Aviv to discuss more. Karl, great to have you on Newsday. Thank you for joining us. Can you give us more details on who he was and why he was so important? Also, any more details about the assassination itself?
Well, this was really a big blow for Hamas. Israel has not claimed credit for this killing, for this assassination, but privately, unofficially, even U.S. officials are saying that Israel's behind this strike. To put things into perspective, this is the first senior Hamas leader to be killed outside of Gaza, outside of the West Bank or Israel. So that's significant right there. It's the first time a Hamas official has been killed in Lebanon, where Hezbollah is, its stronghold, and of all places, Beirut. The last time Beirut was targeted was 2006. And this also comes at a time when there were fears of this war spilling over the border into Israel. What's really striking about this is just the details and execution of this. What happened yesterday, we're now learning, according to Israeli media, is that he was attending a meeting in a suburb of Beirut. That was on the third floor, apparently because of a very extremely good intelligence. They knew where the meeting was taking place. They knew who was there. They knew there were no civilians, residents in the adjoining apartments. They also knew which car he was getting into. He was seen getting into a car. A drone with 3 missiles struck not only the car, but also that office, going through a window with 3 missiles, because they weren't sure whether he was in the car or in the office. So that just shows you how specific the intelligence was, because they knew he was getting into the car, but to be extra sure, they made sure they hit both the car and that office. And that's why you had about 6 or 7 people also killed. You know, when you think about just how will Hamas react afterwards, or Hezbollah for that matter, I think Hezbollah is really more worried about just who knew this information to pass on to Israel if Israel was behind it. This was an exclusive Hezbollah-controlled neighborhood. You could not enter or exit without going through Hezbollah security. And more embarrassingly enough still, here you have al-Azwari, who was a personal guest of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. He also was the one considered to be the linchpin who coordinated ties between Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas in Gaza. He's the one who also arranged for perhaps meetings and training for the fighters of Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank to be trained in Lebanon, to be trained in Turkey. He was the linchpin. He was the mastermind, so much so that the U.S. years ago had placed $5 million bounty on his head for any knowledge of his whereabouts, where yesterday they found out where he was.
Right now, of course, with that location being Lebanon, is there now a greater likelihood of war breaking out on a second front?
Well, what's interesting is that ever since August, these red lines have been laid out by Lebanon, or at least by the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah. Hassan Nasrallah was saying that any attack that kills a Hezbollah member, or a Hamas member, or Lebanese or Syrian on Lebanese soil or territory, that will be a red line, and there will be consequences. That was said back in August. After the war, that similar refrain was repeated. If you listen to Israeli media here, where I am in Tel Aviv, they're saying that enough red lines have been crossed right now for there to be no consequences. They say the train has left the station for there to be no consequences. What that means is that now Hassan Nasrallah is in a difficult position, because he has to give a response. In fact, he's giving a major address that was pre-scheduled today at 6 p.m. local time, where we may get some indication of what to expect. But to put things in further perspective, Hezbollah is perhaps the world's biggest non-state actor with its arsenal of more than 150,000 rockets and missiles, more than most governments in the world, according to U.S. Estimates. In other words, these are not only missiles and rockets, but precision-guided rockets that can be fired from Lebanon deep into Israel. I'm in Tel Aviv, about 150 miles from the border of Lebanon, and they have rockets that can hit the heart of the Tel Aviv where I am. They have rockets and missiles that can reach all the way to Gaza and Egypt as well, because these are Iranian-made Scud missiles and upgraded rockets with GPS systems, nothing like what Hamas has. In other words, Hamas pales by comparison. So a war involving Hezbollah would just be catastrophic for the region. But the country itself does not want the war. It's now going into a recession because of the war. In fact, the caretaker prime minister, Nijab Makiti, saying, Israel is trying to drag us into a war. The economy is cratering. It's heavily dependent on tourism, of almost 30%. Right now, airlines are not flying to Lebanon. Western foreigners are being told to leave Lebanon. The restaurant sector business is down 80%. They're expecting an inflation rate of more than 200% this year, 200%. So the last thing the country needs is a war on its front. And that's why Hezbollah, they may calibrate their response, meaning they'll have maybe short range exchanges that will go deep into Israel, but they'll avoid Haifa, which is close to about 80 miles away, and perhaps avoid Tel Aviv. But we'll know more from this speech at 6 today local time. But to give you an idea of how much uncertainty there was a previously arranged visit by the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken that was meant to happen later this week. That visit has now been canceled in the aftermath of this assassination.
So, Karl, does this bring an end to, excuse me, any deal or negotiation to win the release of the hostages?
Well, they were already very, very wide apart. Negotiations were taking place in Egypt. There were intractable demands. You still have about 129 hostages still captive in Gaza, and yet we don't even know how many are still alive because there's been no access to them allowed for the International Red Cross. But again, the priority was to establish some sort of a pause in fighting, at least for a week, to at least arrange for the release of 40 to 50 remaining women and children in exchange for hundreds, if not thousands, of Palestinian prisoners. That's now been set back, and that now may be set back for quite some time. The irony is, if you listen to the logic as explained by Israeli analysts here, is that the only logic that Hamas leaders and people in this region understand is force. Actually, this kind of pressure by taking out a leader such as Salah al-Aruri may send a message that Israel is deadly serious in its campaign to assassinate top leaders, and Yahya Sinwar is likely to be next, if that's at all possible. So we could see some movement there, but I'll also add, with each day of passing here, the fate of the hostages remains more and more dire because, again, as I said, no one even knows how many are still alive. We haven't seen any proof of life evidence at all of the remaining hostages. Then, of course, there are fears that they don't want maybe some of these people to come out alive because there have been, now a lot of reports of sexual violence against the hostages and captives taken on October 7th.
Right. Now, speaking about those who are being negatively impacted by this in the worst possible way, which is, of course, just regular, ordinary citizens, what is the latest on the status of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza?
Well, that's why this war is really, it's just cascading effects, which are not only disastrous, but catastrophic. Again, as to explain it very simply, the Gaza Strip, a narrow strip of land, 25 miles in length, it's about a quarter of the size of Abuja, a population of 2.2 million. Well, because of the fighting and the mass displacement, half that population has been forced to evacuate and flee to the south. So half the population of nearly 1 million people are now in southern Gaza, camped on the Egyptian border. So that's an eighth the area of Abuja, more than 1 million people in a town of only 200,000. It's now winter here. No clothing, not enough tents, no drinkable water. There was an account today, one woman saying that their ration of a can of peas, some cheese, and a bread was being given to them to last a week for her 4 children. The UN now saying that about half the population is facing starvation, and they already 20% meet the criteria for a famine. And this mother who was interviewed in the Washington Post even said that, they go days without food, and she actually caught her children huddled around the mobile phone looking at a YouTube video showing people eating French fries because that's the closest they could get to food. I mean, that's just how really absurd it is when you look at this. So there's no improvement in that as long as the war continues. And finally, even though they're saying they're now going to increase the flow of trucks and food and aid and fuel to Gaza, it's now maybe just still under 200 trucks a day. But before the war, it's 500 trucks a day. So as long as the war continues, you are talking about really massive starvation and approaching famine in Gaza, unfortunately.
That's indeed unfortunate, but for now, we'd like to thank you for your time and analysis. Arise Special Correspondent Karl Bostic, live from Tel Aviv. Thank you for joining us on Newsday.